and welcome to our webinar today. Our webinar today is called How Did I Miss That Bug? Overcome Cognitive Bias in Testing with Gerie Owen. I'm really happy here to have Gerie Owen join us today. Gerie, why don't you go to the next slide? I'm letting Gerie do the slides so that we can do it at her own pace here. Just a short introduction. We are ExpoSoft, and we're sponsoring the webinar today. And we're a company that was founded over 10 years ago, and we focus primarily and only actually on software QA. And that comes in the form of software QA consulting. And what that usually leads on to is a lot of software testing, of course, as well as process improvement. We have offices in San Francisco and in Beijing, and we believe in being, efficient and effective. Go ahead, Gerie. Okay, just okay. a few house rules before we get started. All of the participants are muted, but you can ask questions through the GoToWebinar control, as well as tweeting your questions at ExpoSoft. You may ask questions throughout the webinar. That's no problem. We'll try to answer them during the webinar if we can fit it in, and if we do not answer your questions during the webinar, we'll of course answer your questions via our blog. One last thing is that you'll definitely get a recording after the webinar, as well as getting a copy of the slides.
Okay.
So my name is Phil Liu, and I'm the CEO and founder of ExpoSoft. I have a lot of interests, but as far as work stuff goes, and you can find that on my LinkedIn profile. But really, what I'm most interested in is cycling and travel, and I'm passionate about that. I usually travel and cycle at the same time, and I've been to, I can't even remember exactly how many countries I've been to, but I think it's over 60. So let me introduce our speaker, Gerie. Gerie is a test architect. Go ahead, Gerie. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Gerie Owen. I'm a test architect. I've also been a test lead and tester, and like all of you, I've found bugs and missed bugs. I do some writing, subject expert for tech target search software quality. I've presented at international and domestic conferences, which I really enjoy. Haven't been to as many countries as Phil. I think I've probably only been to 10, if I include the ones that I went through airports. And I'm a marathon runner. Well, maybe was a marathon runner. I've run 7 marathons and 52 halves. And I coach running, and I'm also a kitty cat mom. So,
well, it's great to have you here.
Thank you. So, I just put together a little agenda here. Why are we talking about missed bugs? That's always a kind of a sore spot, I think, among testers and test managers and project managers, and about anyone else who is affected by them. We'll talk about what is a missed bug, how we miss them, and then we'll get into how we think, and you'll kind of get a connection to that as we go along. And we'll talk about cognitive biases, how that affects testing, and we'll apply it all to missing bugs and how we can manage our cognitive biases as testers, as test leads and managers, as well as a profession as a whole. So, why are we talking about missed bugs? Well, have you ever missed a bug? Have you ever been asked why you missed a bug? Have you ever had a bug that seemed so obvious that you even wondered yourself how you missed that one? Well, there are consequences of missed bugs. I mean, consequences can be anything from negative publicity all the way to loss of life. What I've found often, and especially if they're big bugs, missed bugs basically cause mayhem. When I've been with a lot of different organizations, and there was one in particular, but I think all of them in a way, anytime, even when tiny and insignificant bugs creep into production, that mayhem of magnanimous proportions often ensues, sometimes, and then the focus will be finding on why, and that sometimes even takes priority over the fix. In some organizations, root cause analysis can be used effectively, but in others, it almost amounts to a witch hunt, and just the purpose of which is to assign blame. There was one organization I worked in that they had that art of the assignment of blame down to a science. Every bug that escaped into user acceptance testing or production had to be analyzed for a root cause. If it was a test or miss, it was noted in our test management tool. Metrics were tracked on it. And I was a test lead in an environment like that. And I really wanted to help my testers and help myself too. So I really started to put some thought into how we miss bugs. And what I kind of realized is that the how is really more important than the why. So now I invite you to join me in my journey of how did I miss that bug? So how do we miss bugs? Well, missed test cases, misunderstanding of requirements, even a misjudgment in the risk-based testing. Could also be more human things like inattention, fatigue, burnout, multitasking. But what else? Have we ever thought to maybe take a step back and figure out and think about how we test? So if we're going to think that maybe a missed bug has to do with how we test, then let's figure out what software testing is. So I look at software testing is making judgments about the quality of the software under test, right? Because that's what we do when we present when we present our findings to our steering committees and our project teams. We're making an assessment, right? And those assessment involves objective comparisons of the code to the spec, right? And the subjective assessments regarding usability, functionality, just even your gut feel about how the application is working. So how does that apply to a missed bug? Well, a missed bug then is an error in judgment. So if we want to determine how our testers miss bugs, we need to understand how humans make judgments, and particularly in complex situations, since testing, more often than not, is a complex situation. So how do we think? Well, Daniel Kahneman has done some research on this. He's probably one of the biggest researchers in this area, and he defined a model that divides our thinking into two components. System one thinking, which is usually fast, intuitive, but sometimes wrong. And system two thinking, which is slower, more deliberate, and more accurate. And that is what engages more complex thought and really is used to evaluate decisions. But it can't respond quickly enough for most day-to-day decisions. It takes effort, and it means we will tire out. So basically, your system one is your fast decisions, usually right enough. System two is in charge of doubt and unbelieving, and that's important in bugs, I think. So we'll see how. So how are we going to apply this? Well, system one thinking is applied to our initial reactions, sometimes uses heuristics. System two is applied when we analyze a problem, like when we're calculating a math problem. Now, system one and system two can sometimes be in conflict. And that is where that's where biases come in decision making. Now, biases can impact testing. As objective as we think we may be, we do maintain beliefs in our testing practice. They may or may not be true, and they can affect our test results. Especially, we may be predisposed to believe something that affects our work and our conclusions. This can manifest itself in a couple of different ways. We can test the wrong things.
So, Gerie, when we do test the wrong things, or perhaps we have biases that affect our testing results, are these biases from system 1 or system 2?
Well, it's actually comes from the conflict between system 1 and system 2.
Okay.
Because you're thinking one way analytically, but you're also thinking quickly, and when you don't coordinate those, that's where your biases come from.
Mm-hmm.
So just to kind of give ourselves a little test, can anybody read this?
Well, I think we can guess.
Yeah, exactly. So what you're doing is you're making judgments, right? Because you kind of assume things. Our minds are effective at assuming things. So this could you can still read this, but it does have many bugs there. Called all of them spelling errors, really. So then let's look at some of the biases. This Kahneman and Tversky identified over 100 biases, but there's a few that I particularly think apply most to testing, and so these are the ones that we're going to have a look at now. The representative bias. This is something that happens when we judge the likelihood of an occurrence in a particular situation by how closely it resembles similar situations. The old, well, this is the way we've always done it, right? We tend to approach things, well, let's see, last time the printing always worked, so maybe we don't have to worry about it. But we can be influenced by this bias when designing a data matrix, maybe not testing the data in all states, not testing enough types of data. There was one interesting bug that I saw once. One part of the test was that the documents needed to be able to print. So we printed them. Okay, look good. We didn't think to try to print them a second time. And the bug actually was that you could print it once, but you couldn't print it another time. So because it printed the first time, okay, good. And we missed the bug.
So, Gerie, I have a quick question on representative bias. I was wondering if you had an example in real life that maybe the audience could probably relate to a little better in terms of representative biases. And I've read Demo Kahneman as well, but I can't remember truthfully.
Well, sometimes if you're you may like to go to a certain restaurant because it's usually good. Or you may go to one restaurant and have such a terrible experience that you don't go back. But just because you had a bad experience the one time because your food was slow or it was cold or the service wasn't bad doesn't necessarily mean that if you go back another time, you might not have a better time.
Okay. Yeah, I see. So in other words, you get a minimal amount of data points and you make a general assumption based on those minimal data points.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
That's true.
Okay. Sorry
so
to interrupt.
the curse So the curse of knowledge is one that happens all the time. And this happens a lot when we really get to know our applications. What happens is because we're so knowledgeable about our subject matter that we fail to address it from the perspective of someone that doesn't know it and lose our neutral perspective in the process. When you develop so much domain knowledge, you may not test from the perspective of a new user. A lot of times usability bugs can be missed this way. There was a bug that actually, this was a bug that I found, but could easily, well, I think that the developers missed it because they weren't really thinking. They'd been working with the application for quite a while. This was a e-order entry system for an annuity application. And it was they were adding a new product to this this annuity application, and it was for a decedent IRA. So when there were two spouses and one spouse passed away, the other spouse could continue the contract, and they had to do this application for it. But this application had to be made within 6 months of the date of death. Well, I started testing it, and I'm going through, and yeah, everything so far meets requirements. And I've gone through at least 7 screens of collecting the data, and there's the date of death. Well, I mean, okay, but if an agent is sitting there in front of his or her customer and has taken down all this information and halfway through the application finds out that it's too late to do the whole transaction, that's not going to make the customer very happy. So it was kind of interesting because that bug came back as designed, and eventually they did fix it and move the date of death to the first screen. But, I think what it is that we'd all been working on that so long that we just don't necessarily see it, and that's where it helps sometimes. And for test leads and test managers, it helps to get new people on the team. Have them take a look at it, especially from the usability perspective, because you're used to doing these, things that can be quirky in usability. You may do and just do because that's the way it works, but it's not so intuitive for somebody else.
Right. I mean, actually, when we hire testers, we like to make sure that they have different backgrounds for people working on the same project, rather than just all CS backgrounds or all finance backgrounds and so forth. So I think that definitely works. Yeah.
That's really important. Absolutely. Then the congruence bias. This comes up, of course, in your test planning. It's the tendency of experimenters, or testers for that matter, to plan and execute the tests based on their own hypotheses without considering alternative. This is often when you have when you miss a negative test, this is often the root of it. This is the way it's supposed to work, but you sometimes forget to go back and test that the functionality doesn't work in ways that it shouldn't. Like a zip code, you shouldn't be able to put in 0. You shouldn't be able to put in alpha characters. And boundaries too. You can often miss boundary tests with the congruence bias. And of course, the confirmation bias. This is something we do. This is something we do in discussions and in test design and in planning. The tendency to search for and interpret information in ways that confirms one's initial perceptions. So, if your initial perception after you've done the smoke test, if the quality of the code seems pretty good, then maybe you're going to judge how deeply you test. You may kind of think, oh well, maybe we don't have to do as much. You even can have some bias toward certain developers. You know, if you happen to know that one developer usually does a great job, you may not test that developer's code as thoroughly as you would test somebody that you know tends to create a lot of bugs. And that, you know, I suppose in one way it's good, but in another way it's bad because you can miss some big bugs that way.
Yeah, that's definitely for sure. I think we tend to find what we expect to find or what we want to find. And, we try to combat that when we interview people. A lot of times we have people be interviewed without a resume. And the reason we do that is because if you see that a resume, some guy went to Harvard or, something like that, then you interview them a little bit different and possibly overlook some of the errors they might make because that they went to Harvard. So I think that really applies to many things in our lives.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And that can play into the anchoring effect too. The tendency to become locked on one piece of information and exclude other ideas or evidence that could contradict that initial information. So yeah, I mean, the guy went to Harvard. He's got to know what he's doing. And this kind of applies particularly to testing. When you validate codes specifically, exclusively to the spec, rather than thinking about ambiguities, errors in the requirements, or even general exploratory testing. Now, the final bias that I want to talk about is really my favorite, and but to do that, we're going to just see a little. We're going to try a little experiment. So there's the instructions there. We're just going to watch this little clip and just count how many players are wearing the white shirts, or the players wearing the white pass the basketball. Yeah, that's what you want to do. You want to count the white shirts, how many times they pass. So, okay. So, this is called inattentional blindness. And usually about 50%, I know we have what 18 attendees. I'm curious how many might have seen it or missed it. You don't have to admit it, but probably 50% of you didn't see the gorilla. And I'll admit, the first time, I also missed the gorilla. And so anyway, this was experiment with the gorilla was conducted by Gerie and Simon, who are actually Harvard professors now. And what they were experimenting about is how focusing on one thing can actually make us blind to other things. So basically, what we were doing in that clip there is you were counting the passes. So you were concentrating on watching the ball and watching the players in the white shirts, but you didn't see the gorilla. And we do that. And yeah, you think, oh no, we don't do it, but we do. We do it. This happens because it's a psychological lack of attention. We tend to miss the inconsistencies when we're focusing on a particular task. And so, of course, this is the bugs. These are the bugs that you just, how the heck did you miss it? The first time I gave this, Actually, I just did this as a little lightning talk a few years ago at STPCon, and somebody came up and said, well, I missed the company they tested the website and the company name was spelled wrong. It can happen. I did it myself. I was testing I was testing a smart home, and I was actually testing all the equipment. And at one point, when the electric company would call an event that, if you complied and reduced your usage, you would get a rebate and whatnot. And one of the devices was supposed to have a bright red blinking light. Well, I was doing some regression testing on some other defects, and I missed that the bright red blinking light was no longer blinking. It was just because I was focused on everything else.
Yeah, I think, Gerie, that sometimes, though, we need to recognize when we want the attention blindness, because sometimes we really need to focus hard on things. And I think it's just important to recognize when you're doing that, so that you understand that even though you need to focus on these things, that there are other things that are out there, and that's when it's really good to have a team that really does not, that has differing backgrounds and also understands, the weaknesses of groupthink.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of the confirmation bias, that's the root of groupthink too, because what that will lead, you confirm what you believe is true, and as a group deliberates, they tend to polarize. They get closer and closer to, they get more invested in what they believe, and kind of polarize to opposite. But that's another talk that I do. So yeah, I mean, I think, and as far as, sometimes you do want to put your inattentional blindness on, and that's sometimes, the reason why we do different charters and exploratory. We do multiple iterations. So if we miss the misspelling of the website the first time because we were concentrating so hard on other things, second time through, hopefully we'll catch it. So I guess now everybody's probably asking, well, why do we develop these biases? Well, it's actually because of a bias. We evaluate our own decision-making processes differently than how we evaluate the way others make decisions. I mean, I could not believe when I first watched the gorilla. I couldn't believe I missed the gorilla. Here I thought, I didn't think I really had biases. I thought for sure that, I would find anything, and yet I missed the gorilla. So how does this all apply to testing? We gotta find more bugs. And so in order to find more bugs, we need to manage the way we think throughout the test process. And this can be done it needs to be done as individual testers, as test managers and leads, and even as a professional community. So one of the best way we can start to think about System 1 or System 2 thinking. So which do you think we should test more of? Some researchers, like Millikan, suggest that if we use various ways of invoking System 2 thinking, we will, and like we evaluate multiple options simultaneously, reject each individually and whatnot, some of that would help us. However, but what about an increased focus on System 2? I don't think that that's really going to be what will help us, because this is what we do. This is what it's our test methodology, our analytical framework. We already do a lot of system. Everything is geared to doing system 2. So I think we need to focus more on system 1. We need to use our intuition and our emotion. And I think in ways we can do that is using heuristics with oracles, maybe a certain type of user. When you get into data analytics, you learn more about your personas. Sometimes those users could potentially be oracles. Recognize our emotions as indicators of potential bugs. If you're getting frustrated and tapping on the desk and stuff, and when the page isn't advancing, well, you may have a performance issue there that needs to be reported. And of course, I think the other thing that we really need to do more of is exploratory testing. Exploratory testing can be pretty powerful. It's simultaneous, and it saves time too, because it's simultaneously learning, test design, execution all together. There's some great tools out there now that you can record the session, generate situations of interest. The recordings are great when you find a bug and you need to replicate it before you log it in. But that can be really important. The characteristics you plan. You should plan exploratory testing. It is a learning experience and a discovery process, and it gives you some freedom because it's different for every application. How can we use it? Well, there's a number of ways. We could just do a little unstructured before beginning our formal test cases. If we just do, some smoke testing, some poking around without really thinking, it kind of minimizes our preconceived notions. Again, we can do it oracle based, using the user's perspective, how the data should flow. Those are all ways of implementing unstructured. But we can also do some structured exploratory testing. We can use it to create additional test cases. Maybe we would do it, and we can do it definitely in our sprints. We can do it when we're doing test-driven development, when we're working with the developers. Sometimes it's good to do the session-based with the time box charters, multiple testers, and then reviewing it. It's great to do pair testing too, exploratory, because then you get two people's views, and maybe one person's biases will be counteracted by the other tester. You want to look at some of the situations of interest. What are the usual tasks? What might a user do? Try some different things that you think a user might do. I've always found, I tend to like to hit the back button, because often that doesn't work, but a lot of people do it. And how many times have you reported a bug like that to the developer, and they'll say, oh, well, that users would never do that. And I always say, well, you tell me what else the users will never do, and I'll try that too. And this, it gives you an opportunity to learn about the software, learn from the software. You get to press all the different buttons. What do the different forms do? How do you think the users will want it to work? Is it intuitive? Is it easy to follow, or is it confusing? What happens if you press two buttons at the same time? It's a great chance to play around. And then you can.
Here's a bias, Gerie. If you go back and look at those guys with the arm wrestling, who do you think is going to win?
Oh, yeah. But you never know. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, pretty biased to think the big strong guy is going to win, but that might not be. That might not be true.
a bigger arm is not necessarily more stronger,
Yeah, that's true.
right?
That's true. Or he could get distracted
That's right.
and the other person could win. So, you want to how does it behave as you expect it to? And if it doesn't, explore, keep going. I mean, if you kill one ant in your kitchen, do you just assume that that's that? Or do you check and see if there may be more ants around and put out some ant traps? Um, you want to keep going, and doing exploratory testing, you have more of an impetus to keep going than when okay, well, I'm done my test cases. It gives you more impetus to keep going. Now, I think from a manager's point of view, we need to empower the testers. We need to foster an environment where the testers feel comfortable and empowered to use System 1 thinking. Allow for time for exploratory testing in the test schedule. Encourage testers to take risks. If you think something might be a bug, don't be put off about documenting it. Share it with another tester. Share it with the developer. For the most part, developers do want the bugs to get fixed. Reward for the quality of the bugs rather than the quantity of the test cases executed. When somebody finds a bug that's really deep in the code, like recently, one of my testers found something in the way numbers were being assigned to transactions, and it was happening too soon in the process of extracting them from one system going into the other. That was a really tough bug to find. And what can we do as a profession? Well, we need a real paradigm shift here. We need to shift our focus from requirements coverage and test executing according to requirements to a more intuitive approach. I think exploratory testing and business process testing, those need to become more the norm. They need to be really part of everything we do. Even in continuous delivery, there's still room for some manual testing. And we need to develop our test frameworks where the risk-based testing is executed through target exploratory testing and is balanced with the scripted testing. And overall, our purpose should be about providing information as well as finding bugs. So we want to question our test results. Do we have, when we look at them, well, that's that. Well, is there a reason to suspect we're evaluating them based on our biases? We want to look were the test cases we wrote based on our confirmation bias? Do we just think our test results are great? And was there any differences of opinion when the team reviews them? And if there are, really have to pay attention to that. And so finally, I think, how do we find bugs? Maybe we can focus less and use intuition. And when we see something that we just can't believe, we got to believe it and take another look. So here are all the references that I used. And enjoy bug finding.
It's interesting, Gerie. Yeah, thanks very much. I see that you have a spider there. You've had it throughout your presentation, but a spider is not really a bug, is it?
Yes, I have fallen in love with my spider. Oh. Yes, I've given this presentation a few times, and that has come up that I do use a spider. But if you were looking just for bugs, you might miss the spider.
Right.
If you were looking around for bugs in your house and well, that's an arachnid. Well, I still don't think you want them hanging out in your house.
Right, right. It's interesting. Throughout your presentation, I have been thinking to myself and battling with myself because I disagree with you. That I think that there needs to be more systematic use of system two in being, more methodical in doing our testing. But what I've realized though is that it really depends on your organization and your background. So it seems to me that you've been working in a lot of environments that are very structured that don't really allow a lot of freedom and use of system one and intuition and exploratory testing. And then on the other hand, maybe there are some organizations that are just too haphazard and just have exploratory testing and, maybe no test cases at all. And on the other, that hand, then in that instance, maybe you need to do a little bit more system two testing. So I think
Yeah,
you really need a mix, and it depends on your background and your organization as to what kinds of testing that you need to move toward. Um, in terms of being, a political centrist.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Maybe I do have a bias based
Uh huh.
on the background I came from, but yeah,
Yeah. So
that can be.
it's actually a
I think you got to
representative
evaluate.
bias. It's a representative bias because you've been exposed to these types of environments that possibly are very, very structured. So you're probably thinking that, oh, every place is too structured and every place needs more intuition and system one type testing. What do you think about
Yeah,
that?
yeah. Well, yeah, I agree with you. You probably, yeah. I think you got to evaluate the environment that you're in and see whether it
Yeah,
needs more structure, or maybe it needs more system one, or maybe it needs more system two. That's a good
sure.
point.
Yeah, yeah. Why don't you go to the next slide and we can close this up here? Yeah, so, thanks everybody for attending our webinar. There were a couple questions that came in and we'll handle those on our blog. Um, Also here you can see that we have tons of resources that are available, not only our blog, but lots and lots of white papers. And just follow us, depending on whatever channel you like, whether it be LinkedIn, Google Plus, Facebook, as well as Twitter. And, be updated for all the webinars that we have coming up, the white papers that we release, as well as this recording and the slides. So thanks very much, everyone. Thanks a lot, Gerie, and I really appreciated you sharing your knowledge with us and your cognitive biases. All right. Thanks a lot, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Have a great day.